Have you ever noticed that when you genuinely start to change, when you begin thinking for yourself and questioning things you once accepted without hesitation, the people around you start feeling uncomfortable? They don't say it directly, of course. They disguise it with jokes, with advice masked as concern, with that awkward silence when you talk about ideas that go deeper than surface conversation. But what's really happening beneath the surface is simple and predictable. Your mental evolution threatens their comfort zone, and nobody likes being forced to confront their own complacency. Perhaps you're experiencing exactly this right now. You started thinking differently, acting differently, maybe even questioning beliefs you held for years without examination. And suddenly, you began feeling alone, misunderstood, subtly judged by people who used to feel like your tribe. Here's what nobody tells you, what the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche understood better than almost anyone. This isolation is the price of building genuine psychological strength. Not superficial confidence or performed toughness, but a depth of character so real, so integrated, that it makes others genuinely uncomfortable. It challenges them. It exposes, without you saying a word, the weakness inherent in living on autopilot. But why does this happen? Because a truly independent mind is perceived as a threat to collective mediocrity. When you decide to think for yourself, create your own values, and abandon the comfortable illusion of ready-made truths handed down by authority, you become dangerous. Dangerous to systems that require conformity. Dangerous to people invested in those systems. And most importantly, dangerous to your former self. This exploration is a call, a challenge. It's not made for those who are comfortable with where they are, nor for those seeking easy answers that require no personal transformation. It's made for you who are exhausted by being hostage to your own insecurities, who feel on the brink of an internal rupture, who are ready to build something within yourself that nobody can destroy, a mind that nobody can manipulate, a psychological core that intimidates because it refuses to bend to social pressure. If you feel ready for this path, a lonely and difficult but absolutely transformative path, stay with me. Because what Nietzsche's philosophy has to teach you will confront you with uncomfortable truths, but it can also set you free in ways you haven't imagined. And after this, you will never think about mental strength the same way again. Nietzsche, the psychologist of human transformation. Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher writing abstract theories. He was what we might call a psychologist of the human condition, someone who had the intellectual courage to look into the abyss of existence and not just face it, but dive into it completely. And it's precisely in that abyss, in that internal chaos that most people spend their lives avoiding, that he discovered the source of genuine psychological strength. For Nietzsche, transformation doesn't happen through peace, stability, or comfortable order. It happens through adversity, through failure, through chaos. He wrote something that sounds poetic but is actually a psychological diagnosis. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. This isn't metaphor. This is recognizing that if you want to build an unshakable mind, you need to abandon the childish fantasy that it will happen through comfort, cheap motivation, or positive affirmations alone. Real psychological strength is forged when you face suffering without fleeing from it. When you stop asking for life to be easier and start demanding that you become stronger. Think about the times you grew most as a person. Was it when everything was going smoothly? Or was it when you were broken, lost, without direction, forced to rebuild yourself with your own hands? Modern psychology has confirmed what Nietzsche intuitively understood. Dr. Nassim Taleb's concept of antifragility describes systems that don't just resist stress but actually grow stronger from it. This applies to human psychology as well. Research on post-traumatic growth by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun has documented how people who face significant adversity often report meaningful positive changes, including greater personal strength, deeper relationships, and renewed sense of meaning. Nietzsche didn't romanticize suffering. He understood it as a tool for transformation. And if you can fundamentally change your relationship with pain, with failure, with the loneliness of your own development, you begin shaping something rare, an indomitable spirit. And this is precisely where you begin to disturb others. Because while most people flee from psychological chaos, you learn to navigate within it. While others beg for normalcy and predictability, you create something exceptional from the raw materials of challenge. But this transformation requires a brutal break with everything you were taught about mental strength. Being psychologically strong isn't about smiling constantly or projecting false emotional control. It's about enduring what feels unbearable and emerging on the other side, even more psychologically integrated. The weight of radical responsibility, one of Nietzsche's most profound insights, was about what happens when you stop outsourcing responsibility for your life to external authorities, systems, or inherited belief structures. He understood that most people live with a comforting illusion, that there's some higher authority taking care of everything, that there's a predetermined plan, a pre-established meaning, a purpose given from outside themselves. But Nietzsche tore away this veil. He confronted people with a challenging truth. You are fundamentally alone in creating meaning. There is no instruction manual. There are no guarantees. There is no external authority to blame. And this is terrifying, because until you face this, it's easy to outsource responsibility. It's comforting to believe that everything happens for a reason, that suffering is part of some larger plan, that there's a greater purpose that will justify everything eventually. But when you strip away these comforting fictions, what remains? You, your choices, your responsibility, your freedom to create meaning. This is where genuine psychological development begins. Because most people psychologically collapse when they realize they're alone facing chaos, without a manual, without guarantees, with no one to blame but themselves. But those rare individuals who have the courage to face this without crumbling begin to forge an unshakable consciousness. Dr. Rollo May, one of the founders of existential psychology in America, wrote extensively about this. He called it existential anxiety, the discomfort that comes from recognizing your absolute freedom and responsibility for your existence. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, described a similar insight in his concept of the will to meaning. He observed that those who found personal meaning in their suffering, who took psychological ownership even in the most horrific circumstances, maintained their humanity and resilience. This radical freedom that frightens you is also the greatest source of psychological power you can develop. When you truly understand that nobody is coming to save you, something within you awakens, a fire that compels you to rise even while you're bleeding. That forces you to think for yourself, feel for yourself, act not because someone said it's right, but because you've decided it aligns with your authentic values. It's in this rupture with external authorities and ready-made answers that you prepare the ground for something profound, the emergence of what you're capable of becoming. Becoming your authentic self. Nietzsche didn't believe in slow, passive evolution of human potential. He believed in rupture, in radical transformation, in what he called self-overcoming. He conceived of a psychological ideal he called the Übermensch, often translated as overman or superman. But this is easily misunderstood. This isn't about physical superiority or dominating others. It's about psychological transcendence of limiting patterns. The Übermensch represents someone who has overcome everything that typically binds ordinary consciousness. Guilt not based in real harm, obedience to arbitrary authority, herd morality that doesn't align with authentic values, the desperate need for external validation. This ideal doesn't seek to be accepted by everyone. It doesn't ask permission to exist authentically. It creates its own internal values and lives by them, even if that puts you at odds with collective thinking. And this is exactly why this level of psychological development becomes unshakable. It's not built on the shifting sands of others' expectations. It doesn't need external approval to validate its worth. It's psychologically self-sufficient. This relates to what psychologist Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, the realization of one's full potential. Maslow studied people he considered self-actualized, like Eleanor Roosevelt and Albert Einstein, and found they shared characteristics remarkably similar to Nietzsche's ideal: autonomy, resistance to enculturation, spontaneity, and what he called creative living. Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset touches on similar themes. Seeing yourself as capable of development and growth rather than fixed in your capacities creates profound psychological differences in resilience and achievement. The central insight here is this: the self-actualized individual doesn't adapt to the world's expectations. They impose their authentic values on their choices and actions. They don't seek comfort above all. They seek growth and meaning. They don't ask, "Is this allowed?" They ask, "Is this worthy of who I'm becoming?" And this shift in perspective changes everything. When you start seeing yourself as the author of your life rather than a character in someone else's story, the way you think, act, and feel transforms completely. But here's the challenge. Becoming this kind of psychologically integrated person requires sacrifice. You will have to release parts of yourself that still desperately seek approval. You will have to face the pain of not belonging to groups that require you to diminish yourself. You will have to bear the weight of building your identity from scratch, without guarantees, without constant validation, without applause. And most people cannot handle this pressure. They give up before they truly begin. They run back to the safety of ready-made beliefs, dogmas, and rules that someone else wrote for them. The path to psychological authenticity is lonely. Nietzsche knew this from personal experience. He lived on the margins of society, misunderstood, called mad, isolated from the world he was trying to wake up. But it was in that isolation that he found his intellectual freedom. And this is what you need to understand. The stronger your mind becomes, the further you naturally drift from collective thinking. The higher you rise in self-knowledge, the more you disturb those still living unconsciously. The solitude that comes with strength, there's something nobody tells you about the path of genuine mental development. The stronger you become, the lonelier you often feel. And it's not because you're isolating yourself by conscious choice. It's because the world simply doesn't know what to do with people who think independently. Nietzsche spoke clearly about this reality. The free spirit, the one who breaks away from conventional morality, who doesn't accept easy truths, who thinks critically for themselves, inevitably distances themselves from what he called the herd. And that distancing hurts. But that psychological pain is necessary because real growth requires space. And you cannot grow while remaining entangled in the expectations of others. Most people live within an invisible herd where every thought is policed, every action measured by others' reactions. You've gotten used to walking in a group, thinking like the group, feeling secure because there are people around you who think similarly. But what Nietzsche proposes is the opposite. He tears you away from that comfort and throws you into what feels like a psychological desert. In that desert, there are no applause, no constant validation, no guide holding your hand. There's only you, your doubts, your unresolved trauma, your fears, your desire to give up and return to comfort. And that's where the real test of character begins. What will most people do? They'll run back. They'll hide again behind their social masks. They'll pretend they don't feel deeply, that they don't think critically, that they don't see what they clearly see. But you, if you truly want to become someone that nobody can psychologically break, will have to stay in that desert. You will have to endure the silence that reveals who you actually are beneath all the social conditioning. Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." That's the essence, psychological self-ownership. The rarest and most powerful achievement anyone can attain. Because when you truly own yourself psychologically, nobody else can control you through manipulation, shame, or social pressure. Nobody else dictates your worth. And nobody else can fundamentally bring you down. But this self-ownership comes with the weight of loneliness. You will lose relationships that were based on who you were pretending to be. You will be misunderstood by people who knew the old version of you. You will hear that you're arrogant, strange, distant. They will try to pull you back into the comfortable mold. They'll call you selfish, cold, difficult. But that is the price of not being domesticated by social expectations. It's the price of not needing constant applause. It's the price of not living as a mirror reflecting others' needs. Research by social psychologist Roy Baumeister on belongingness shows that the need to belong is fundamental to human psychology. But there's a crucial distinction between belonging by conforming versus belonging by being authentically yourself. The former creates psychological fragmentation. The latter, though rarer, creates integration. And here's the difficult truth. If you cannot tolerate periods of solitude, you're not ready for psychological freedom. Because all real freedom comes with periods of standing alone. The confrontation with mediocrity. Nietzsche didn't fear dictators or declared oppressors. What he feared and denounced with philosophical intensity was the subtle, corrosive power of what he called collective mediocrity. That invisible system that keeps everyone psychologically leveled down. That punishes those who dare to think differently. That rewards obedience and disguises psychological cowardice as virtue. True psychological tyranny, according to Nietzsche, doesn't come from obvious external oppression. It comes from social pressure, from the crowd that demands you remain small so they don't have to confront their own stagnation. And this is exactly what happens when you start to psychologically stand out. When your thinking becomes sharper, your character firmer, your presence more genuine and therefore more uncomfortable, you begin to disturb others. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something rare, breaking the mold of expected behavior. And collective psychology hates mold breakers. Individual psychological development exposes the darkness of ordinary, unexamined living. Nietzsche called this dynamic slave morality, a moral system built by those who, unable to achieve genuine excellence, decided to invert values. They transformed psychological strength into arrogance, healthy ambition into selfishness, independence into coldness. They created a value system that protects the comfortable and condemns those who push boundaries. But understand this clearly, it's not out of compassion. It's out of what Nietzsche called ressentiment, a deep psychological resentment. Because people who have surrendered to mediocrity don't want to be inspired or challenged. They want those who are developing to be torn down to their level. This is why when you start to psychologically liberate yourself, social attacks begin. Sometimes directly, sometimes subtly with looks, with silence, with passive-aggressive remarks. But the message is always clear. Come back to the group. You're making us uncomfortable. You're making us feel small just by being who you're becoming. Social psychologist Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments demonstrated how powerful social pressure is. In his studies, people would deny what they could clearly see with their own eyes just to conform to group consensus. The pressure to agree with the majority is profound and automatic. But Nietzsche understood that most people exist in a state of paralyzing conformity, an existence shaped by fear, guilt, and obedience to unexamined social norms. And anyone who questions this state is perceived as threatening. Mediocrity doesn't attack with obvious force. It attacks with numbers, with consensus, with the weight of repeated social messaging. It will try to make you doubt your own perceptions and judgments. It will make you think you're wrong for not fitting in seamlessly. And this is the moment when many people give up, because they cannot bear to be seen as strange, difficult, or arrogant. But Nietzsche would give you a different label: necessary. Because while the world revolves around recycled ideas, manufactured desires, and comfortable truths, it's the psychologically independent individual who brings the necessary discomfort for genuine evolution to occur. Your difference is the spark of potential transformation, but it's also the target of resistance. The price and power of psychological sovereignty: you've made it this far. That already distinguishes you from the majority. Most people would have closed this exploration at the first uncomfortable provocation. They would have fled at the first moment of psychological discomfort. Because building a mind strong enough to be psychologically sovereign is not just a choice. It's a series of renunciations. You will lose things. You'll lose relationships that were based on who you were pretending to be. You'll lose opportunities that would have required you to diminish yourself. You'll lose the ability to be content with psychological superficiality. But in exchange, you gain something genuinely priceless: integrity, clarity, authentic presence. You'll begin to notice that most people live in a psychological slumber, that your clarity makes them uncomfortable, that your firmness challenges their flexibility toward whatever is convenient, that your absence is noticed more than the presence of many. This strength doesn't come from external sources. It's not taught in self-help books, nor earned through repeated affirmations or temporary motivation. It's forged deep within, in the silence of difficult nights, in choices nobody else sees, in the constant practice of psychological honesty. It's the result of an internal war between who you were conditioned to be and who you're authentically becoming. And this war doesn't end, because the genuinely strong aren't those who have won once. They're those who continue developing even when they could coast on past achievements. Nietzsche didn't want to create followers or disciples. He wanted to provoke internal earthquakes in consciousness. He wanted you to stop begging for approval, to stop seeking in ready-made systems what can only be built through self-examination, effort, and awareness. He wanted you to become psychologically dangerous, not in a violent sense, but in a rare sense. So rare that your mere existence forces others to look in the mirror and confront what they've been avoiding about themselves. Dr. Martin Seligman's research on learned optimism and Dr. Angela Duckworth's work on grit both point to similar conclusions. Psychological resilience and the capacity to pursue long-term goals despite setbacks are learnable skills that distinguish those who achieve difficult things from those who give up. The path Nietzsche described isn't about becoming perfect or invulnerable. It's about becoming integrated, authentic, and psychologically sovereign. It's about owning your choices, your values, and your development rather than outsourcing these to external authorities or social pressure. This is the ultimate psychological freedom, not the absence of struggle, but the capacity to struggle meaningfully. Not the elimination of pain, but the ability to extract growth from it. Not the guarantee of belonging, but the courage to stand alone when necessary. You're not doing this to intimidate others. You're doing it to stop betraying yourself, to stop living a half-life of constant performance and anxiety about others' perceptions, to finally inhabit your own consciousness fully. And if that makes others uncomfortable, so be it. Their discomfort is their responsibility to process, not yours to prevent through self-diminishment. The world needs people who have developed this kind of psychological strength, people who live with integrity, people who choose authenticity over approval, people who create rather than merely consume ideas and values. If this exploration has awakened something in you, don't stop here. The journey of psychological development is lifelong. There's always more to integrate, more conditioning to examine, more potential to realize. You are not alone in this path, though it sometimes feels that way. You are simply ahead of where most people choose to remain, and that reality is both challenging and profoundly liberating.